I'm losing it.
You're losing it big time.
Hey, welcome back to Screen Crush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things that you might have missed in episode 4 of The Last of Us. So I feel like the first 3 episodes were all set up, like the opening act of a series, and now this episode is where we're starting to get into the really meat of this story. Second acts are famously where things start to go very wrong for the characters and where they're at their lowest point. And after episode's tender, uplifting ending, it's inevitable that the show is going to get a lot more grim. So it's appropriate that the theme of this episode is about loss of innocence. We see this reflected in all the various storylines throughout the episode. Joel, Ellie, Kathleen, even this kid are all expressions of this theme, and I'll explain all of them as we go along. No spoilers for the game are ahead, but I will say that it's about to get real dark, so let's break down this episode. Alright, now my favorite thing about this is that when you shoot.
Are you eating chips in the middle of an Easter egg video?
Yeah, sorry, I stress eat, and this show is really stressful.
People don't want to hear that. Knock it off. Find some way to stop stress eating or you are fired.
Okay, sorry, I'll work on it. Now, back to what I was saying. So we open with Ellie posing with a gun in front of a mirror.
Or like Travis Bickster in Taxi Driver.
Well, Doug, that's not exactly right. They are 2 people who are practicing with guns in front of a mirror, but Travis Bickle was hyping himself up to play a kind of role, the role of a badass, avenging street warrior.
Talking to me? Well, I'm the only one here.
Bickle is having fun, but he's more of a man on a mission, whereas Ellie is just having fun holding a gun because, you know, it's fun. America! She even makes little pew-pew sounds. Now, she's also imagining herself as somebody who's a badass, like any of us would imagine ourselves during a zombie apocalypse. So maybe she is kind of more like Travis Bickle than I thought. They're both looking into mirrors and learning to see themselves in different roles. Notice how Ellie ends the scene with this cocky little smile on her face and she smells the gun, implying that she has this kind of idealized view of violence like it's going to be fun, which this episode is going to change her mind about. Outside, Joel explains why they're getting new gas every hour and even reminisces that a tank of gas used to last for 10 or 12 hours. Then Ellie asks,
So where'd you go?
Pretty much nowhere.
and this is a subtle but powerful exchange. Ellie is obsessed with knowing how the world used to be. She wants video games, airplanes, she wants to restore the world as it was. But Joel talks about the before time with a kind of practical cynicism. He hated riding in airplanes.
Get shoved into a middle seat, pay $12 for a sandwich.
He couldn't afford the nice hotel.
You ever stay in a place like this?
No, a little out of our league.
And here he says,
Pretty much nowhere.
because people before wasted their time and they didn't appreciate what they had, just like Joel maybe didn't appreciate Sarah. He worked too much and missed much of her day-to-day life. He also doesn't care about these conveniences of the past, because for him, the only part of the past that mattered was Sarah, and she's gone. Remembering the world from 20 years before is only reminding him of her. That's why Joel stays focused on the here and now and not trying to restore the world as it was. For him, that world is gone forever. So to siphon the gas, they have to suck it out of a hose.
Close your eyes and suck it out of a hose? Suck it out of a hose, yeah.
And this was also a fun way to show that Joel isn't that book smart,
Travels against gravity because pressure.
You don't know.
I know it works.
which we also saw in the first episode.
Jakarta. Where is that, Middle East?
Now, I pointed this out in last episode, but Ellie's new shirt is the same one that she wears in the video game. And here's another fun Easter egg from the game. The joke book, no pun intended, is an artifact that you can find in the game. And in the Left Behind DLC, we see that Ellie's friend Riley gave her this book.
It's for you.
Riley is supposed to appear in a flashback episode, so we'll likely see this scene in the show. You can also see the book in Ellie's house in The Last of Us 2. And by the way, these puns are great fun.
It doesn't matter how much you push the envelope. It'll still be stationary.
You know, Doug, my local paper was holding a pun contest.
Oh yeah, they did? So what happened?
Well, I sent in 10 of my favorite puns, hoping that one of them would win. Unfortunately, no pun intended.
You're fired.
Hold on just a second.
Hey, what is that? Are you vaping on the job?
No, this is not a vape at all. See, I have a few oral fixation habits that I'm trying to kick, like the stress eating that we talked about earlier. This just gives my hands something to do when I'm feeling anxious about getting our videos done.
Well, then what is that?
Well, it's a natural diffusive device called Fume. They're the sponsor of this video. It actually uses plants and behavioral science to help you trade out your negative habits for a positive one.
Is it fun?
Yeah, it's really nice. You see, instead of pods filled with potentially harmful chemicals like a vape, Fume uses cores infused with plants like peppermint or cinnamon for delicious natural flavors. See, I thought it would actually be gross, but I was surprised at how good they tasted. My favorite is crisp mint, especially when it hits the back of your throat.
But I don't smell anything, and I am a dog.
Yeah, dude, it's not a vape. You use it to change your negative habits into positive habits. Fume wants to make switching easy and even fun. They have thousands of 5-star reviews from people just like you who successfully switched when other solutions just didn't work. So head to tryfume.com/ScreenCrush or scan the QR code and use the code ScreenCrush to save 10% when you get the Journey Pack today. Now the Journey Pack comes with 3 unique flavors and the new version 2 Fume to help you kickstart your positive habits. That's tryfum.com and use the code ScreenCrush to save an additional 10% off your order today. Now back to the Easter eggs. As Joel and Ellie drive along, Joel explains why the highways are so clear.
Yeah, they used to stick big-ass plows on them and clear the roads for their tanks and such.
Now here he's talking about FEDRA, the government agency that essentially became a fascist state in various cities across America. Ellie finds all of this very exciting.
I want to see a tank.
Now, in the game, Ellie does see a tank in the next part of the story, but in the game, that takes place in Pittsburgh, whereas in the show, it's been moved to Kansas City. Again, we see a pattern here of Ellie being very excited about relics of the past, but Joel approaching the world with this kind of worried cynicism.
Tanks, choppers, all that stuff. Built to fight the wrong enemy.
Now, I think that what he means by this is that the government used these weapons to oppress their own people instead of using them against the infected. So I think here we're talking about FEDRA being a group that oppressed the American people. But we're going to see this theme explored by Kathleen's group later in the episode. But also, Kathleen herself is an example of somebody using weapons for the wrong reasons. As we'll see, she has all these guns and resources, but instead of using them for the benefit of the city, they're out for revenge against people who collaborated with FEDRA. But more on that in a bit. The scene where Ellie finds Bill's magazine is lifted straight from the game.
Light on the reading, but it has some interesting pictures.
Oh, no.
How the hell would he even walk around with that thing?
Get rid of it.
Hold your horses. I want to see what all the fuss is about. Why are these all stuck together?
I'm just f***ing with you.
And so is her finding the Hank Williams cassette tape.
Here, this make you all nostalgic?
You know, that is actually before my time.
It's a winner, though.
The Hank Williams song is called Alone and Forsaken, and it perfectly expresses the episode's theme of the loss of innocence, particularly Joel's innocence. The song begins in the springtime with lyrics like, "The pastures were green and the meadows were gold, our love were a flower as summer grew on." But then, her love like the leaves has now withered and gone. And even later in the song, the darkness has fallen and the sky has turned gray. See, the song begins in warm spring weather and ends in this ashen landscape of heartache. This is much like Joel's life has fallen apart without Sarah. Losing her was the moment of his personal loss of innocence. When they pull over in camp, this is a scene that is not in the games, and this is where the show really excels at adaptation. The game couldn't really give us like long character dialogue scenes like this because, well, I mean, there's nothing to shoot at. But here these scenes give the characters a chance to grow and to learn more about one another. Ellie wants to start a fire, and Joel treats her like she's an idiot.
Now, why am I going to tell you no?
I mean, look, fair enough. The hobbits learned that lesson, right?
Tomatoes, sausages, nice crispy bacon.
But the main lesson here is that they don't fear the dead. They fear the living. Again, foreshadowing the main thread of this episode, the most fiercest game of all, man. And we also get a nice reminder of last episode.
Actually smells kind of good.
Well, that would be Frank's then.
That's so nice.
And when they go to bed, Ellie has to shout for Joel.
Joe!
And this is probably when she figures out that he is hard of hearing.
Notice you don't hear too well from your right side.
Now, this disability is a departure from the game, and the show's creator said that they did this intentionally. They wanted to give Joel a human weakness, so he's less like an invincible Superman like he is in the game. I mean, fair enough. In the game, he gets shot, he gets stabbed, and he just keeps going with only like a medkit ration to fix himself up. Now, this weakness does pay off later when he can't hear Brian enter the back door of the mat. Now, I also like that they added this because it's a neat detail that his weakness is because of the years that he has spent firing a gun.
Only more from shooting.
It shows that his years of killing have taken a toll on his body, symbolic of the toll that they've taken on his soul, which again, we're going to talk about later. Then he makes a promise.
No one's going to find us.
Now, maybe she put that idea in his head, but Joel ends up waking up to stand guard. Now, I think he does this in part because he's starting to think of Ellie as kind of like a new Sarah, and he wants to protect her. The next morning, her line about the coffee
That's seriously what those Starbucks in the QZ used to sell?
is actually lifted from the game.
Did you go to coffee shops a lot?
But she also says,
It smells like burnt shit.
and so does Starbucks. It's burned coffee with a cup of sugar stirred in, and I will die on that hill. As they trace through the map, she says,
70 West for like
ever.
And it really, really does. I'm convinced that this is where David Lynch got the idea for Lost Highway. Among the cities she lists is Laramie, the setting for a brilliant play called the Laramie Project. Now that play is a perfect expression of human love breaking through hate, which in a lot of ways is exactly what this show is about. So then Joel starts to open up and to fill in the blanks of what he's been up to for the past 20 years. First, he talks about his brother.
Tommy's what we used to call a joiner.
Oh, he's a carpenter who installs doors. My great-grandpa Bill was a joiner.
No, a joiner. A joiner like he joins up for causes. He doesn't install doors.
He might.
Yeah, he might. Hey, by the way, what did you do last night?
Oh, you don't want to know what I did last night.
Okay, but Tommy also joined the military to serve in Operation Desert Storm back in 1991. We saw this from his bumper sticker in episode 1 that he was a combat vet from that war. Marlene, who we also met in episode 1, recruited him to join the Fireflies, which is why Joel thought that she would know where he was. But the real point of all this is that Joel resents his brother for thinking that he could even save the world. It's ironic that Joel is now on a quest to save the world because Ellie represents a potential vaccine. But Joel puts his faith in people and not in causes. Now Ellie takes in all of Joel's cynicism and has a perfect response.
If you don't think there's hope for the world, why bother going on?
And Joel responds,
Keep going for family.
and right there, that's all you need to know about Joel. And this might come into play later in the series as Ellie becomes like family to Joel and, well, gamers know. So Ellie is young and she's a symbol of optimism, somebody who wants to restore the world to the way it was. Joel is just trying to protect what he has. And the next scene in the I'm not tired gag is also taken directly from the game.
You got up pretty early if you want to grab more sleep.
I'm not even tired.
Also, like in the game, they run into a traffic jam with a tunnel blocked because of a jackknife Sara Lee truck. Like I said earlier, this happens in Pittsburgh in the game, but they changed it because the Steelers suck. So they moved it to Missouri, which is further west.
Kansas City's in Missouri?
Yes.
Interesting.
Alright, so when they detour through the city, a couple films from 2003 are playing at the theater. Underworld and Matchstick Men. Underworld is a franchise about a millennia-old war between vampires and werewolves. So this premise that two monsters are fighting each other might seem like it's symbolic of the monsters roaming around the earth in human skin. But it's more indicative of Kathleen's group fighting Fedra. We see a few reminders of this violence with a pile of burned skeletons in the city.
They become so sickened with hate, it's like they themselves have become the monsters.
Well done, high five. The other movie, Matchstick Men, is about Nicolas Cage playing a hardened con man who opens up his heart to his estranged daughter, Angela. Now this is similar to the father-daughter relationship of Joel and Ellie as he learns to open his heart to the world again. Now, as soon as they see that Fedra has fallen, they know that they're in trouble. Notice that for Ellie, this is unthinkable. Fedra has been the most stable force of her entire life. The scene with the guy pleading for help is also lifted from the game, as is the car crash and the shootout afterwards. Now the fights are similar, but also lifted from different moments in the game. The laundromat setting is actually taken from The Last of Us 2, and the part where Ellie kills the guy choking Joel is from a little later in The Last of Us 1 when a man is trying to drown him. I also think that symbolically, it's important to note that Joel wants Ellie to stay in this hole.
And you squeeze through and you don't come out until I say, and they're not going to hit you.
The last episode introduced holes and basements as a metaphor for loneliness. Bill and Frank are both first seen in holes. And then there's that zombie in the basement that's filled with fungi and subtext. And later in this episode, there's another potential zombie in a hole that we'll talk about in just a bit. Joel wants Ellie to stay in a hole, a place of isolation, but instead she emerges to save his life. Now notice that in this scene, we first think of Brian as a faceless enemy, like an NPC that we're just out to kill. But then he desperately humanizes himself.
My mom isn't far. If you can get me to her.
He mentions his mother, he gives his name, says, I didn't know. And as we'll see a little later, the problem with the world is now this lack of humanization.
Oh, you mean the zombies?
No, I mean that humans no longer see the humanity in one another. The United States has fallen into tribalism. They only see themselves as us and them. Kathleen and her group are the perfect expression of this. Now in the game, this group of ambushers are just called the Hunters. They basically trap and raid people who are passing through the city, but the show has given them a lot more nuance to show why they are hunting. Just like in the game, there's a moment where they discover the bodies and want revenge.
76 lookout guy, some tourists killed him. Kill all of them.
Understand? And he won't stop until we stop him.
Also, like in the game, Ellie has to crawl through tight spaces all the time to open doors for Joel. But now let's talk about Kathleen's group, because they are a perfect expression of the episode's theme of the loss of innocence. So, like we saw in episode 1, Fedra is a law enforcement agency that declared martial law. In Boston, they still control the QZ and they hold events like public hangings. Bill called it.
And the government are all Nazis.
The government are all Nazis!
So, in Kansas City, people overthrew Fedra and took control of their base and weaponry. For instance, one of these guards is carrying an M16, the standard issue rifle of the US military.
I'm particularly fond of these. I pulled them out of a place on Midgard called Texas.
Then we meet Kathleen, played by the great Melanie Lynskey. Now, this is a very different kind of role for her. She's normally playing like put-up-on Midwestern women who you think will be meek, but then turn out to have a violent inner strength. Actually, I guess this is kind of the exact right role for her. Kathleen is leading a group that overthrew Fedra. So this is a pattern we've seen repeated like all throughout human history. The revolution overthrows a corrupt government. Then they seek out retribution, the people who collaborated with the old regime. And then they often institute the same laws that made the government evil to begin with, and the whole process starts again. For example, Lenin overthrew the Tsar, which then created the brutal regime of the Soviet Union. Now here, Kathleen is looking for Henry. Slight spoiler, this guy at the end is Henry with his brother Sam. At least they're brothers in the game. Now, in the game, Henry is just some guy hiding out from the hunters, but here, they've reinvented the story to make Kathleen have a personal vendetta against him. What I'm gathering here is that Kathleen and Henry were part of a rebel group with Kathleen's brother. Henry turned on them, probably to save his brother Sam, and now Kathleen wants revenge. But more importantly, she's using Henry as a scapegoat, someone she can use to unite her people behind her. When they discover Brian's body, she finds a way to pin it on Henry because she is so focused on revenge.
This is Henry's work, and he won't stop until we stop him.
And when people need to hate against one person or a group, they're more likely to follow a strong man leader, or a strong woman leader, I guess in this case. So Kathleen is already employing the same fascist tactics as Fedra, hunting down citizens for revenge, using Fedra tactical gear to break into homes, driving Fedra trucks, using the Fedra prison, which also looks like it was cobbled together from old shipping containers, by the way. They have spray painted their slogans on Fedra trucks, which is also lifted from the game, but all in all, they're becoming just another fascist police state. This is also reminiscent to the great novel Animal Farm by George Orwell, which is a cautionary tale about how revolutions can lend themselves to corruption. In Animal Farm, the animals overthrow the farmer, but eventually the ruling pigs become so corrupt they're indistinguishable from the humans. And this is where we see Kathleen's loss of innocence. It's easy to imagine that before Fedra, she was a sweet person. The doctor who delivered her seems to think that he still knows her, and he can only see the innocent person that she once was.
I delivered you. I held you in my hands.
Now she shows him and us that she is no longer an innocent person when she executes him. All of this is a reverse of the moment with Ellie and Brian, where she didn't have the heart to pull the trigger. It's kind of like Ellie and Kathleen are the before and after. So while they're hiding out from the hunters, we start to see how Joel has become fond of Ellie. He's mad at himself for not hearing Brian, because this meant that Ellie had to shoot him.
You're just a kid.
Now we've seen Joel try to protect Ellie from physical harm, but this is the first time he's tried to protect her from emotional harm. And then Bella Ramsey gives us this incredible, subtle piece of work.
It wasn't my first time.
And this is what makes Ellie an extraordinary person. She's not totally innocent. As we'll probably see in a future episode, she's already had to make a hard decision. Yet, despite the evil that she's already faced, she is still optimistic about the world. She wants to live and not just to survive. And just like in the game, Joel teaches her how to hold a gun.
Over your thumb. Left hand. Squeezes down on the right. Got it?
Go and pull the bolt back. Grab it right there. Just tug it. There you go.
So back to the hunt for Henry and Sam, where they found their former hideout, complete with these drawings that Sam has made of himself and his brother. Now in the game, Sam also had an affinity for superheroes and toys.
Sam, what are you doing? Nothing. Get rid of it.
I think these drawings are very important because they show another example of someone who is still finding ways to maintain their innocence. Sam is a little boy in hiding. He still has the power to dream of a world where he and Henry are invincible super people who can fly away from all their troubles and be happy together. But while Sam and Henry were living the dream at the top of the building, the basement holds a crushing reality.
What's in there?
Well, we can't be for sure, but I'm gonna guess that it's a bloater. One of the decades-old zombies like this one that we saw in the Last of Us trailer. Basically, the bloater's entire bodies are overgrown with the fungus and they're not nigh invincible. So this is a very real, existential threat to Kathleen and her people. But instead of fighting it, she chooses to ignore it and to focus on revenge instead.
Let's just handle what we have to handle. We can deal with this after.
Now this is what Joel meant when he said that the military used their weapons on the wrong people. Instead of fighting the infected and combating real threats, Kathleen is interested in culling her own. So this could be a bloater that represents the ills of revolutionary society, or it could simply be your mom. When Joel and Ellie reach their new hideout, they continue to break down the emotional barriers that exist between them. Ellie asks,
"How did you know it was an ambush?"
And Joel admits that his group, with Tess and Tommy, did similar things to innocent people, and this conversation is also lifted from the game.
Oh, you kill a lot of innocent people? I'll take that as a yes.
So this was probably what Tess was referring to back in episode 2. She saw Ellie as a way to redeem the sins of her past.
And you said everything right. All the shit we did.
Now Joel has probably never talked about the awful things that he did back then, but Ellie asking him about them causes him to open up and begin a kind of therapy session. This allows Joel to finally allow his humanity to shine through. He is obsessed with the idea that he failed Ellie because she was forced to pull the trigger.
It isn't fair.
I think that, like I said earlier, this is because he is starting to see Ellie as a new Sarah. Up until now, he treated Ellie like he did Sarah. He shielded them both from violence.
You keep your eyes on me, okay? You don't look anywhere else.
I'm sorry, please.
So this scene is like how he would have reacted if Sarah were all of a sudden forced to pull a trigger. He no longer sees Ellie as cargo, and he starts to see her as a kid, maybe even his family. And so finally, he's ready to laugh.
Did you know diarrhea is hereditary? It runs in your genes.
So this moment of release and joy suddenly gives way to another reminder of a loss of innocence. A young boy pointing a gun straight at Ellie. She began the episode play acting, a kid pretending to know how to use a gun looking in a mirror. But now she's faced with the real thing. Another kid, another potential innocent, holding an instrument of death in her hand. So the very first scene of the episode is actually foreshadowing the very last shot of the episode. Oh, and last episode I forgot to mention that this moment,
Dead people can't be infected,
is also lifted from the game.
Did they kill them?
Dead people don't get infected.
So this was a kind of episode of television that usually, I think is just filler. It's a chess episode where the pieces are being moved around the board and being introduced so they'll pay off 2 or 3 episodes down the line. But this relationship between Joel and Ellie makes the episode so riveting. We're finally starting to see them open up to one another, the way Bill and Frank opened their hearts to each other in the last episode. Great character episodes like this are what actually make The Last of Us work. So there's high stakes before we get to all the zombie murder and action. But I want to know what you guys thought of all this. Let me know down in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For Screen Crush, I'm Ryan Airy.